What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to another Sports Talk on Tab video, where here you can find daily uploads Monday through Friday covering all the four major sports leagues, whether it be NFL, NBA, NHL, or MLB, games, news, highlights, and all that fun stuff we'll be here to talk about. But in today's NFL segment, this will probably be our last, or not our last, but, our specific team before, training camp gets underway, because maybe tomorrow be ready for us to, kind of look for some training camp things to look for teams in training camp as it approaches. We're going to be very excited to see that. But before all that, today, Nick, we're going to focus on a very, arguably, I would say, we've talked about a lot of interesting teams, but this is one of the more polarizing teams entering this season. The Jacksonville Jaguars, obviously, this team going just back a couple of years, were the worst team in the league. Drafted Trevor Lawrence. We're once again the worst team in the league. That's when they used to draft Josh Allen, or not Josh Allen, someone else from Georgia. Trevon Walker. Yeah. Still not the best pick, but anyways. So back-to-back number one overall picks. They hired Doug Peterson to kind of revamp that culture, and pretty quickly the ship turns around. They start off a little bit. I think they start off like 3-8, but they rattled off 6 straight wins to get into the playoffs. 9-8, that crazy comeback win against the Chargers. They put up a good fight against the Chiefs in Arrowhead. I think it was like a 27-20 dogfight. Happens though. The eventual Super Bowl champions. So then you go into this year with even higher expectations. And it was a weird start because a lot of people, despite the Jaguars starting off 8-3, still kind of had them on fraud watch. They didn't think that, they were beating any good teams yet. And then obviously, despite being 8-3, the injuries pile up. Christian Kirk deals with the hamstring, the number one receiver on the Jaguars. And then Trevor Lawrence, high ankle sprain, misses a game, but also just was impacted a lot in the games, and you could see a clear drop in his stats and just overall play. And then they losing streak, lose the last game of the season to the Titans to miss the playoffs. They finished 9-8 again, but this time don't even get a shot, and now they're kind of back to the drawing board. So this offseason, they let Calvin Ridley walk, who kind of had a mixed year, 1,000+ yards, but didn't quite fit in, wasn't necessarily quite the playmaker they thought he could be. So they lose him to the Titans, but they drafted Brian Thomas from LSU, so your guy, LSU guy. And then they also pick up Gabe Davis from Buffalo, who's basically big-time playmaker, and that's what he is. Just there are some games with Buffalo, he'd be 100 yards plus. There were some games he didn't even have a catch. That's just kind of the kind of guy he is, but he's a big-time playmaker. And so now you're running that receiver core with Christian Kirk back. And then the defense, they didn't really make any huge changes. I know they lost like Darius Williams. But the biggest move this offseason was obviously giving Trevor Lawrence that 5-year, $275 million contract. And so now they're kind of locked in. I think they're kind of, just running, besides obviously those changes at receiver mostly. I think they're kind of, going to run it back, see what they can do. Bolster up that O-line to protect Trevor. I'm curious, Nick. I've seen a lot of mixed bag. I've seen analysts thinking this team will regress just because of their losses. I've also seen people say they'll kind of, just get better with them fully healthy and some new additions that they made, or will they kind of just be somewhere in the middle for you again? What are your thoughts on this season?
I think they're going to get better just with overall being healthy. Like when your quarterback is hurt, no matter what, your team's going to take a big hit. And like you just said, we saw that even when Trevor Lawrence came back onto the field, like his numbers weren't the same. He didn't look the same. He kind of looked like he did a few years ago when he was still trying to develop. But now that he's healthy, has, full off season of recovery, knows what he's working with all his weapons. I think they're going to be like one of the better wild card teams, because I still think, as of right now, as we speak, it's the Texans division. And unless anything crazy happens, like unless CJ Stroud has, one of those sophomore slump years where he just all the defenses have him figured out. Unless that happens, I think it's going to be the Texans division. But I do see the Jaguars as another playoff team out of the South because I still think it might only be one team out of the AFC East. Obviously, the AFC North is a division where like they could have 3 teams easily, maybe even 4, depending on how good
Yeah,
you know
that division's
field
just
or
always
whatever.
been great.
Yeah, and then the West is probably just the Chiefs, unless like the Chargers or the
Yeah,
Raiders make a surprise push, which I can't see the
definitely
Chargers.
be the Chargers of any team.
Right. But I can't see the Chargers this year being better than the
Yeah,
Jaguars just because, like, they don't have the pieces yet. So I can
you
see
know,
Jacksonville as, like, one of those wild card teams. They could, flip the script on Houston, say they beat Houston twice and, just sneak by them and win the division. I can see that happening because in football, you never know. But still, as of right now, I see it as Houston's division, which is why I would pick them as a wild card team.
yeah, it was a really weird beginning of the year for Jacksonville as well. Just the offensive line wasn't really good. It wasn't really good throughout the whole season. So that's still my biggest question mark. Can they protect Trevor Lawrence? Because when he has time, he can deliver dots. We've seen that. And also just the offensive play calling, because it wasn't even Doug Peterson for most of the year calling plays. It was their offensive coordinator. Um, I'm wondering if they're going to mix that up at all, just because Doug is still one of the best offensive minds, and just some of the play calls looked very questionable. And I get what Doug's trying to do, being a head coach of the full team, not just trying to take offensive responsibility. But at the end of the day, if you feel like there needs to be a change,
Mhm.
you're the guy that's up for it, with the offensive scheme just as much because you're in that
Yep.
offensive room probably the most. And it just was some question marks throughout the whole season. So I would just say those things. But when you look at it, Trevor Lawrence has all the talent, has the accuracy, just the arm talent to be one of the best QBs in this world. And you just gotta, he got paid it. I really thought, when we were talking a month or two ago before the extension, that this was a big make or break year, and I was expecting a huge break season for Trevor Lawrence. But he gets paid regardless, just because of the work he's already done to make Jacksonville a relevant team again. But it is still definitely going to be something to keep an eye on. Like you said, the AFC, besides the AFC North, is pretty wide open. But I would say the AFC South, the Jaguars got to be careful because a team like the Titans that everyone's projecting or the Colts, maybe to finish last, those two teams still have a lot of talent and are like, if you're not careful, they could easily split with you because, last year Titans beat Jaguars. The last game of the season for Jaguars to go to the playoffs. So, it's very, up for grabs. But obviously, I'd say the biggest benefit is I would still I know CJ Stroud had a great year, but I would still take, as of right now, my QB power rankings, Trevor Lawrence slightly over him, just because I need to see a little bit more before I believe it. So I think best quarterback in the division. At the end of the day, I'm just really, I think Brian Thomas is going to have to make an impact as well, just because we know Gabe Davis is inconsistencies. We know Christian Kirk's a really solid receiver. He's still that number one, but he's more of just like a slot guy. So they need someone else to, worry about the other things to help make this offense fully click and give it, the 3 deep offense, as they call it.
Yeah. Brian Thomas is such a freak athlete too. Like I do remember watching him at LSU with Jaden Daniels. I'm pretty sure he had more touchdowns than Malik Neighbors this year. He might have led all of college football in touchdown catches. So, and
It's good to
I
hear.
also think him and Brian Thomas were one of 3 LSU receiver duos with 1,000 yards each. It was those two, Jamar and Justin Jefferson, and then Odell and Jarvis Landry. So we
Why
saw
do you
how.
think?
What's up?
Maybe you'll know this. Maybe I don't know. Why do you think
Mhm.
Malik Neighbors was drafted 18 spots higher? Was there a significant difference in their talent? Base stats, show 1,000+ yards each. Brian Thomas more touchdowns. Is there something
There,
just
there kind of was a. I don't want to say a giant difference, but I'm pretty sure Malik Neighbors led all college football in receiving yards. He was ahead of Marvin Harrison in a lot of stats in college this year. Now, granted, Marvin Harrison was getting doubled, pretty much all the time, and he was still putting up great stats. So that speaks volumes to him. But Malik Neighbors, I think, is like the more talented prospect. Like his ceiling is probably way higher than Brian Thomas's. I think Malik Neighbors could be one of the best receivers in the league in a few years if the Giants don't, screw up his development. Because
that's a big ask.
LSU in general develops good receivers. We've seen it all the time. You see it firsthand watching the Vikings and how good Justin Jefferson is and how good he was pretty much right out of the gate. LSU gets those guys, NFL ready. So I think the biggest difference, and Malik Neighbors might be a little younger than Brian Thomas, but I could be wrong. I'd have to look that up. But I just think he's the more developed prospect of the two. He was way more NFL ready. Brian Thomas is like a deep threat guy,
But that's exactly what Jacksonville needs, because I didn't want to say anything before I didn't, but like you have Christian Kirk to kind of run the short intermediate. Gabe can run deep. He's probably more intermediate guy, but you need that consistent deep threat that the long developing plays that he can get open. So that's great to know. So I think overall that will kind of fit this game, because there's obviously receivers that have more of like a different game, like a slot game versus deep threats. So I think that'll be a good fit to kind of offset what Christian Kirk does well, what Gabe Davis does. So I think that'll be perfect then. But still.
Yeah, I just looked it up. Malik Neighbors is only 20 years old. So
how old's Brian Thomas, do you know?
21. So it's actually not a huge age difference. But in the NFL, maybe 1 year makes a difference for some of these teams. But
I was just wondering, because I'd assume it's probably talent alone, maybe.
Right. It's just NFL readiness is
separation might be a big thing.
But,
I mean, very good. So Jacksonville, that's what I'm most excited to see. How did those three connect? Because that will kind of what fluctuates the offense along with that offensive line. Can they have a bounce back? Because you still have Brandon Sheriff there, and they also added another offensive lineman. I don't know his name right now, but they'll come back to me. But may have been Mitch Morse. But overall, should be very interesting. As they kind of first step protect Trevor Lawrence, then the receivers get open. And I'm very excited to see this offense because, Trevor Lawrence is a paid man now. You still have ETN in the back that we haven't even brought up yet, who's still very solid. If he can stay healthy, kind of a dual threat catch, run player. But it should be very interesting how Jacksonville does in a really tough division. But, I've probably been high. I've been high on them all season, projected them to win the division. So we'll kind of look back a couple months from now, see how stupid or how genius that prediction may be. With that being said, let us know in the comments what you guys think. Are the Jacksonville Jaguars going to make the playoffs and bounce back, or will they get even worse and miss the playoffs and only win 8 or less games? We're always curious to get your thoughts in the comments. But let us know. Training camp is just getting underway in the next couple of days. Chiefs already there. Couple teams, so it's a very exciting time, and tomorrow we'll probably be here with some things to look for training camp across the league. With that being said, as always, make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace.